A lawyer's letter arrived on a Tuesday. It used words like unstable and detrimental and sole custody. Elara Vance read it in her corner office, 40 floors above the city that had bent to her will for 2 decades. The glass walls reflected a woman forged in polished steel and quiet leverage. The letter was a declaration of war from a man she had dismissed as a footnote in her life. She called her own lawyer, a man whose ruthlessness was his primary asset. His voice was a calm razor over the phone. The judge was old school, a traditionalist. He was putting significant weight on the child's stability and home environment. He wanted to see both. So she had to go there, to that patch of dirt and trees Caelan Hayes called home. Her sedan, a silent German predator in the city, felt alien on the gravel road. The farther she drove from the highway, the more the manicured world of her life peeled away, revealing something raw and untamed underneath. The road became a muddy track. Her tires spun. The car slid sideways and settled into the ditch with a soft, expensive sigh. Stuck. She sat for a full minute, the engine off, listening to a silence broken only by the drip of water from a tree branch. This was his territory, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. She got out, her heels sinking immediately into the soft earth. She ruined them with a single step. The cost of the shoes was more than he probably earned in a month. The thought was automatic, a reflex of a life spent calculating value. A thin curl of smoke rose from a chimney beyond a line of trees. She walked toward it. The house was not a house. It was a testament to wood and stone and patience. It looked as if it had grown out of the hill rather than been built upon it. A man stood on the porch, sanding a long plank of pale wood resting on 2 sawhorses. Caelan Hayes did not look up. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy. The rasp of the sandpaper was a steady, rhythmic sound. He wore worn jeans and a plain grey shirt. He looked like a part of the landscape. Worthless, her lawyer had called him. A carpenter, living on sentiment. She stopped at the edge of the lawn, a clear demarcation between the wild grass and the tamed mud on her shoes. "I'm stuck," she announced. The words felt loud in the quiet air. He finished a long, smooth pass with the sandpaper. He set the tool down. He looked at her. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, clear and unreadable. He did not seem surprised. He did not seem anything at all. "There's a tow service in town," he said. His voice was low, like stones rubbing together underwater. "They'll be here in an hour, maybe 2. "I don't have 2 hours, she said. He looked at the sky, then back at her. Land doesn't rush. It was not an apology. It was a statement of fact. The arrogance of it tightened her jaw. She reached into her purse, her movements sharp and efficient. She pulled out her wallet. "How much to pull it out with your truck?" His gaze dropped to the money in her hand, then returned to her face. He did not move. He did not speak. 2 seconds of silence. Long ones. The quiet was his weapon. She had boardrooms and balance sheets. He had this suffocating stillness. Finally, he walked past her, not waiting for an answer. He went to an old, faded blue truck parked near a barn. The engine turned over with a gruff rumble. He backed it toward the road without another word. He worked with the same methodical quiet he applied to his woodworking. Chains rattled. The truck engine strained. The sedan rose from the mud, coated in a thick brown skin. He parked it on the driest patch of gravel he could find. He got out of the truck and walked back to the porch. He picked up the sandpaper. She stood by her filthy car, feeling foolish and strangely powerless. "Thank you," she said. The words tasted like defeat. "How much do I owe you?" He stopped sanding. He looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He went inside the house. He came back out a moment later, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. Her name was written on the front in a familiar, looping script. It was her father's handwriting. Her father had been dead for 6 months. She took the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. Her hand closed around it hard enough to crease it. How did you get this? He asked me to give it to you, Caelan said. The next time I saw you, he turned and went back to his work. The rasping sound started again, steady and final. It was a dismissal. Elara stood there, holding a letter from a dead man, delivered by the one she was trying to erase. The custody battle was a simple transaction. This was not. This was a mystery. She drove back to the city, the letter heavy on the passenger seat. She did not open it, not yet. Control was about managing information, and this was a variable she could not account for. Back in her sterile apartment, the silence was different. It was the hum of servers and climate control, not the breathing of the world. She poured a glass of wine, the crystal ringing softly. She sat on a white leather sofa that had been curated for a magazine spread. She sent a single encrypted text to her assistant, Jasmine. A name, Caelan Hayes. The instruction was implied, dig. Then she opened the letter. The ink was faded slightly. Her father's words were not about business or inheritance. They were about regret, about a life spent chasing the wrong things. He wrote about a man he had met late in life, a craftsman who understood that true value was not in what you could acquire, but in what you could build with your own two hands. A man of immense, quiet worth. He was talking about Caelan. The last line was a plea. Look closer, Elara. Before it's too late. She read it 3 times. It felt like an accusation. The next day was a custody mediation. A conference room, another sterile box. Elara sat on one side of a polished table, her lawyer beside her. Caelan sat opposite, alone. He wore a clean, pressed shirt. He looked out of place like a river stone brought indoors. Her lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of Elara's life, stability, resources, a world-class education for their daughter, Lily. He presented tax returns, asset summaries, a portfolio of success. He was building a fortress of numbers. Then he turned his attention to Caelan. He used phrases like unpredictable income, isolated environment, lacking in ambition. He presented a photo of the house in the woods. He called it rustic, in a tone that meant inadequate. Caelan listened without expression. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. When the mediator asked him to speak, he said only a few words. My home is safe. Lily is happy there. It was infuriatingly simple. He was letting her lawyer define him. He was letting himself be painted as worthless. The mediator scheduled a home visit for the following week. For both of them. Later that day, Jasmine's report arrived. It was a thin file but dense. Elara opened it, expecting a list of small carpentry jobs and tax records bordering on poverty. That was not what she found. Caelan Hayes, Bachelor of Science, Mechanical Engineering, Master's, Materials Science, former lead project engineer at Aerodyne Innovations, a top-tier technology firm. He had left the company 7 years ago. The reason cited was personal leave following the death of his wife, Anya Hayes. Elara's breath caught. She had known he was a widower before they had their brief, ill-fated relationship, but he had never spoken of it. She had never asked. The report continued. Caelan Hayes was the sole holder of a portfolio of 17 patents. They were complex, dealing with things she didn't understand. Composite materials, energy storage, water purification. The estimated value of the portfolio was not listed. It was marked as pending appraisal, potentially significant. She closed the file. The man her lawyer had just publicly branded a failure held patents that could be worth millions, maybe more. He was living in that cabin in the woods by choice. The image of him on the porch, sanding a piece of wood, shifted in her mind. It was no longer a picture of aimless simplicity. It was a picture of chosen purpose. The weekend arrived. It was her scheduled time with Lily. She picked her up from the neutral ground of a downtown park. Lily was 6 years old, with her father's quiet eyes and a world of her own making. She was clutching a piece of paper. "What's that, sweetie?" Elara asked, her voice softer than the one she used for business. Lily held it up. It was a drawing, A crayon sketch of a bird with impossibly blue wings. "It's for Daddy's house," she said. "For Anya's window." Anya, the name again. Elara felt a strange, cold pang. Who was Anya? She was a scientist, Lily said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She liked birds. Daddy made a window for them. Elara looked at the drawing. A child's simple tribute to a ghost. She was in a custody battle with a man, and she didn't even know the name of the most important person in his past. The home visit was scheduled for a Wednesday. The mediator, a woman with tired eyes and a sensible suit, arrived at Elara's apartment first. She walked through the silent, art-filled rooms. She noted the view, the clean lines, the lack of any personal clutter. It was a showpiece, a magazine layout. "It's very organized," the mediator said. Then they drove to Caelan's. Elara insisted on riding with her. She wanted to see the mediator's reaction. The house was the same, quiet, grounded. Lily ran out the front door, not to Elara, but to a patch of wildflowers growing near the porch. Caelan came out and nodded a greeting. Inside, the house was filled with the smell of sawdust and baking bread. Everything was made of wood, and every piece of furniture felt like it had a story. Intricate joints, smooth, hand-rubbed finishes. It was not a collection of objects, it was a curated life. On one wall there was a large, beautifully framed window that didn't look outside. Instead, it was a shallow box, intricately carved. Inside, dozens of small, wooden birds were suspended on fine wires, each one a different species, carved with breathtaking detail. At the bottom, a small brass plaque read, "Aviary." Lily's drawing was taped to the glass. The mediator stood before it for a long time. "This is remarkable," she said, her voice soft. Caelan just nodded. It's where she did her best thinking. They had lunch at a massive wooden table. Simple soup and fresh bread. Lily talked about the deer she had seen that morning. Caelan listened, asking quiet questions. Elara sat in a silence that felt different from the one in her apartment. This one was full. As they were leaving, the mediator paused on the porch. "Your daughter is very comfortable here," she said to Elara. It was not an accusation. It was an observation, and it was more damning than any legal argument. On the drive back, Elara felt a creeping sense of dread. She was losing, not because of money or stability, but because of something she couldn't buy. Authenticity. That night, a new player entered the game, a man named Marcus Thorne. He was Elara's chief rival on her company's board, a shark who smiled. He called her. "I heard about your custody issue," he said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "Must be stressful. I'm managing," she said, her voice cold. He paused. "You know, I'm finalizing the details on the Blackwood Creek project. That big parcel north of town. It's right next to your ex's property." Ex was not the right word. They had never married. But she let it slide. "What about it, Marcus? Just a heads up. We're breaking ground soon. There will be a lot of noise, a lot of disruption. Not exactly a peaceful, stable environment for a child. Might be something your mediator would find interesting." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. He was leveraging her personal life for a business advantage. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice flat. "Your vote on the acquisition of Phoenix Corp. My project goes smoothly, your custody battle goes smoothly." Simple transaction. He hung up. Elara stood in the dark, the city lights glittering below. He was connecting her world to Caelan's. A corporate skirmish was about to spill into that quiet clearing in the woods. The next morning, she was driving to a meeting when it happened. She pressed the brake pedal. It felt soft, spongy. She pressed it again, harder. The car barely slowed. Panic, cold and sharp, flared in her chest. She swerved, narrowly missing another car, and aimed for the emergency ramp on the side of the highway. The car shuddered to a stop, the smell of burning brakes filling the air. She sat there, her hands shaking. It wasn't an accident. It was a message from Marcus, a first attack. This was no longer just about leverage. It was dangerous. She didn't call her own mechanic. She didn't call the police. She called the one person she knew who dealt in the real and the tangible. Caelan answered on the second ring. "My brakes failed," she said, her voice tight. There was a pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes." "Where are you?" she told him. He said he would be there. He didn't ask why she had called him. He arrived in his old truck, a large toolkit in the back. He looked at the car, then at her. He didn't say a word. He just got to work. He lay on the asphalt, his face grim. After a few minutes, he slid back out. He was holding a small piece of metal. The brake line was cut, he said, almost all the way through. It was meant to fail under pressure. It wasn't a question, he knew. "You can't stay in the city tonight," he said. "It's not safe. I have security," she started. "They can't stop this," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "This isn't about a locked door. You need to come with me." She looked at the man she was fighting in court, the man her lawyer had called worthless, and for the first time, she felt a sliver of trust. She was a woman who commanded armies of lawyers and analysts, but in this moment of raw threat, she was turning to a carpenter with quiet hands. She got into his truck. The drive back to his house was silent. The forced proximity felt charged. She was a trespasser in his world, a refugee from her own. The truck smelled of sawdust and engine oil, a world away from the conditioned air and leather of her sedan. When they arrived, Lily was on the porch, drawing. She looked up and saw Elara, and her face broke into a small, uncertain smile. "You're staying for dinner?" Lily asked. Caelan put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Yes," he said, "she is." That night, Elara slept in a small guest room. The bed was made of the same pale wood as the plank he had been sanding. The sheets smelled of fresh air, not detergent. She lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the forest, feeling financial armor she had worn for years begin to crack. The next day, Caelan worked in his shop. She watched him from the porch. He moved with a grace that belied his strength, his hands shaping the wood with an innate understanding of its nature. She was used to seeing value in spreadsheets and stock prices. He was creating it from a raw plank. Later, as the sun began to set, they sat on the porch. Lily was inside, asleep. "Why did you leave Aerodine?" Elara asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Caelan was quiet for a long time, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight. "Anya died there," he finally said. The words hung in the air between them. "It wasn't an accident," he continued, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "She was a researcher, an environmental scientist. She found something the company wanted to keep buried. What did she find?" He turned to look at her, his eyes dark in the fading light. Evidence of illegal dumping, toxic waste. In a watershed that supplied 3 towns, she compiled a report. She was going to go public. He paused. "They called it a chemical spill in her lab. A tragic accident." Elara felt a cold dread spread through her. Marcus Thorne. His Blackwood Creek project. It was all clicking into place. Marcus had been a junior executive at a subsidiary of Aerodine back then. "The land he wants," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Blackwood Creek parcel. It's where she believed the primary dumping site was," Caelan said. "He isn't just building something. He's paving over a crime scene." Now she understood. The patents, the simple life. Caelan hadn't run away from the world. He had been waiting, biding his time. The custody battle had been a background noise to a much longer, quieter war. "My God," she said. He looked out at the dark woods. Most people only see what's flowering, they miss what's moving underneath. Anya knew that. She made a copy of her data. She gave it to a friend for safekeeping, just in case. "Who?" Elara asked, leaning forward. "An old farmer, Silas Blackwood. His family owned that land for 100 years before the company forced them out with legal tricks. The alliance was no longer unspoken. It was forged in the quiet darkness of that porch. Her war for custody and his war for justice were now the same." The next morning they drove to Silas Blackwood's farm. It was a few miles away, a collection of weathered barns and a small, tidy farmhouse. Silas was an old man, with hands like gnarled roots and eyes that had seen too many seasons. He greeted Caelan with a nod. He looked at Elara with open skepticism. "She's with me," Caelan said simply. Silas led them into his kitchen. It smelled of coffee and damp earth. He sat them at a worn wooden table. He listened as Caelan explained the situation. He listened as Elara described Marcus Thorne's project and the threat he represented. When they were done, Silas was quiet for a long moment. He studied Elara's face. "Anya trusted you," he said to Caelan, "but she," he nodded toward Elara, "is one of them. The money people." "I'm," Lara said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "Not anymore." Silas seemed to weigh her words. He got up and went to a shelf filled with old jam jars and almanacs. He took down a small, crudely carved wooden birdhouse. It looked like something a child would make. He worked at the base with a pocket knife. A small section of the wood came loose. From a hidden compartment, he pulled out a small, unassuming USB drive. Anya said to give this to someone who could use it not just for justice, but for renewal, Silas said, placing it on the table between them. "I hope you're that someone." Back at Caelan's house, they plugged the drive into Elara's laptop. It was all there. Anya's complete, unredacted research, soil sample logs with GPS coordinates, internal company memos forwarded to her by a whistleblower who was never identified, a detailed chemical analysis of the toxins, and a financial projection showing the staggering cost of a proper cleanup, a cost the company had decided to avoid by silencing her. It was the smoking gun, but it was more than that. The final folder on the drive was labeled Project Renewal. Inside was Anya's theoretical work on a revolutionary water filtration system, using a biocatalyst to neutralize the exact toxins she had discovered. It was the genesis of the patents Caelan now held. He hadn't just been waiting for justice. He had been completing her work. Elara looked at Caelan, who was staring at his late wife's work on the screen. She saw not just a grieving husband, but a man carrying a legacy. The corporate armor she had spent her life building was gone. In its place was a cold, clear purpose. She had spent her career acquiring companies and crushing rivals. Now she would use those same skills to dismantle Marcus Thorne. "Okay," she said, her voice the one she used in the boardroom, the one that made men nervous. "The annual shareholders meeting is in 2 weeks. Marcus is presenting the Blackwood Creek project for final funding approval. That's our stage." She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was no longer a refugee in his house. She was a general, planning a campaign from a forward operating base. She marshaled her resources. She called Jasmine, her loyal assistant, and gave her a series of encrypted tasks. She had her pull the original, falsified environmental reports for the Blackwood Creek project. She had her research the corporate shell game that led from Aerodyne to Marcus's current company. She called her lawyer. Not the ruthless one, but an older, semi-retired attorney who had once advised her father. A man who understood ethics. She explained the situation, sending him a protected copy of the drive. For days, Caelan's house became a war room. Elara worked with a focused intensity Caelan had never seen. She was a force of nature, but a different kind than the ones he knew. She moved through data and legal statutes the way he moved through wood grain, seeing the patterns, the weaknesses, the inherent structure. He kept the house running. He made meals she barely noticed she was eating. He took care of Lily, keeping her world calm and steady amidst the storm gathering in their living room. One evening, he came in from his workshop and found her asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on a stack of legal documents, her laptop still glowing. He gently took the blanket from the back of a chair and draped it over her shoulders. She stirred, but didn't wake. Her hand, which was usually clenched or holding a phone, was relaxed, her fingers slightly curled. He looked at her, this powerful, complicated woman who had crashed into his life and felt something shift. A wall he hadn't even realized was still standing began to crumble. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived. Elara flew back to the city. She wore a simple dark grey suit. It was armor, but a different kind. Not for intimidation, but for solemnity. Caelan came with her. He wore that same clean, pressed shirt from the mediation, a silent observer in a world that was not his own. Lily stayed with Silas's wife, safe from the coming fallout. The boardroom was a cavern of glass and polished mahogany. The air was cold, humming with quiet power. The board members, men and women who controlled billions, sat around the table. Marcus Thorne stood at the head, beaming, a model of the Blackwood Creek project, gleaming under the spotlights. He began his presentation, glossy videos, impressive financial projections. He spoke of jobs, of progress, of shareholder value. He was selling a beautiful lie. Elara let him talk. She waited, her hands calm in her lap. Caelan sat in a chair against the wall, a quiet, immovable presence. Marcus concluded his speech with a flourish, a triumph of vision and opportunity, he called it. He asked questions. Elara raised her hand. Marcus's smile tightened. Elara, I trust your personal matters are resolving? They are, she said, her voice clear and steady in the silent room. I have a few questions about the geology of the site. She stood up and walked to the front of the room. Jasmine, waiting by the door, dimmed the lights and turned on the main projector. Instead of a geological map, a photograph of a smiling young woman appeared on the massive screen. Anya Hayes. A murmur went through the room. Marcus's face went pale. This was Anya Hayes, Elara began. She was a scientist, and she was murdered 7 years ago because of what she discovered under the ground you plan to build on, Marcus. The room erupted. The chairman hammered his gavel. Elara didn't raise her voice. She simply continued, her tone factual and cold. She projected Anya's documents, the memos detailing the illegal dumping, the chemical analysis, the GPS coordinates of the toxic plume now overlaid on Marcus's own development plans. It was a perfect match. She then showed the falsified environmental reports Marcus had submitted, highlighting the forged data points. She showed the money trail, meticulously pieced together by her father's old lawyer, linking Marcus to the corporate entity that had covered up Anya's death. It was a systematic, brutal demolition. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Lies, he sputtered. Fabrications from a disgruntled ex-employee. Elara didn't look at him. She looked at the board. Anya Hayes left behind more than just evidence, she said. She left behind a solution. She clicked to the final slide. It was the logo for a new entity, the Anya Hayes Renewal Foundation. She explained the patents Caelan held, the revolutionary water filtration technology. She announced that the entire patent portfolio, valued by an independent firm at just over $2 billion, was being transferred to the foundation. Its first mission, to clean up the Blackwood Creek watershed, at no cost to the taxpayers. The man you dismissed as worthless, she said, turning her head slightly toward Caelan, has been quietly finishing her work. He was building a cure, while you were planning to pour concrete over the disease. The silence in the room was absolute. The board stared not at Marcus, but at Caelan, this quiet man in a simple shirt who had just been revealed as the steward of a legacy worth billions. My final motion, Elara said, her voice ringing with authority, is to turn over all evidence to the federal authorities waiting downstairs, and I tender my resignation from this board, effective immediately. She walked back to her seat, her work done. The power in the room had shifted completely. Marcus Thorne was no longer a rival. He was just a criminal about to be arrested. The aftermath was swift. Marcus was indicted. The company's stock plummeted. The board, in a desperate act of damage control, fully funded the cleanup and publicly partnered with the new foundation. Elara's victory was absolute, but it felt hollow. The power she had wielded so expertly now seemed like a blunt, clumsy instrument. She spent the next few weeks dismantling her old life. She sold the apartment, the art, the car. She liquidated her assets, funneling a significant portion into the foundation. She kept only what she could fit into a simple new truck. She finalized the custody arrangement. It was no longer a battle. It was a simple agreement between two parents. Joint custody, with Lily's primary residence being the one that felt like home, the one in the woods. One crisp autumn afternoon, she drove north. She left the highway behind, the road growing more familiar. She pulled up the gravel drive and parked her new truck next to Caelan's old one. He was on the porch as if he had been waiting. He wasn't sanding wood. He was just sitting, watching the leaves fall. The front door opened and Lily ran out. She didn't run to Caelan this time. She ran straight to Elara. She threw her arms around her legs in a fierce hug. In her hand she held a new drawing. It was a picture of the house. On the porch stood three figures, a man, a woman, and a small girl. In the drawing they were all holding hands. Elara's eyes welled up. She knelt and hugged her daughter back, breathing in the scent of pine and childhood. She walked up the steps to the porch. Caelan stood up. They faced each other, the space between them filled with unspoken history, the crash, the letter, the threat, the alliance, the victory. She looked at his hands, strong, capable, covered in a fine layer of sawdust. Hands that could build a house, or hold a legacy, or comfort a child. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a smile, a small, genuine lifting at the corners of his mouth. He reached out, not to shake her hand, not to embrace her, but for something smaller. He gently brushed a stray leaf from her shoulder. His fingers grazed her jacket for a fraction of a second. It was the lightest touch. It was everything. Some people spend their lives acquiring things, only to find their hands are empty. Others build, piece by piece, until they have something real enough to hold.